People trust you, or let's say you hope they do. Well, some people work at organizations for quite a while, and probably you derive from that behavior that they trust you. And unfortunately, I can tell you that is not the conclusion you should make. Just because someone stayed in an organization or still stays in an organization for quite a while doesn't mean that they trust you in the slightest. So we have to talk about what actually is trust, how to deal with trust and everything which is connected to it. So, of course, you need trust in your teams. That's obvious. However, you or many leaders might think that just when you work together for a long time, people start to trust you. And that is, scientifically speaking, wrong. They might be there, they might do their task, they might even consider you a well paying organization that pays the rent or the mortgage, and they like to come and leave on time at the same time, but they don't trust you. They do the job, but that's actually it. And when that happens, by the way, without trust, you don't have teams, you have groups of people working on tasks, but not teams. You have no cohesion in the team. So as soon as crisis happens, people disperse pretty quickly. And that means you have no sustainable solutions for the hardest times to come. We don't know when these times come. And that's exactly the point we're going to get to in about a minute. So how can you position your organization, your leaders in a way that people gain more trust in what you do? So first, we need to look into science, and I'm talking about Professor Cecil Neely's Harvard University research. She talked about what is trust, and there is not just one trust. I give you a very simple explanation here. When you, for example, work in the department and someone tells you, hey, 1st of June, we have 2 new people starting. It's Mrs. Miller and Mr. Smith. Now you could just wait until Mrs. Miller and Mr. Smith arrive, and then you can talk who they are. But that's not what you do. You go on LinkedIn or any equivalent in your country, for example, in Germany, Xing. You go on Facebook, you go on Instagram, Snapchat. You try to find anything you can get, and that is an important point where leaders have to intervene very quickly. First, of course, you cannot keep people away from doing their research because they will do that. They want to know who's the person arriving here. And what people gain as soon as people arrive is cognitive swift trust. That's the scientific term. So it's a decision they make, but it's swift. It can change very quickly, and it's also pretty superficial. When people, for example, go on LinkedIn and say, oh, God, no, another person not from our industry, it will take forever until they know what they're doing here. And it's all happening while we're already overwhelmed with the task right now. And leaders will just say, could you please do that? And it's all on us, just again. Or they might find something where they are really impressed and they are looking forward to someone joining the forces with you. And you, as a leader, have to proactively communicate that. When you, as a leader, say, look, it's a very tense situation in the talent market. We found someone who, in the interview, performed very well, not from the industry, as we know. However, we see the potential due to A, B, C, and we hope that you can integrate the person in your team. People will appreciate that. You, as a leader, have to design the cognitive, swift trust given by the people in your team to anyone entering the team, because if you don't, people will do it by themselves. The problem is that cognitive swift trust, as mentioned before, is pretty superficial. We need cognitive swift trust because otherwise we wouldn't be able to work together with anyone in the short run. And as soon as you hire someone, no one will accept when you say, yeah, just wait for 8 to 9 months before I will work together because I don't trust anyone. That's not how organizations work. We need to at least superficially trust people pretty quickly. However, the real cohesion of a team is emotional trust. And emotional trust is gained when people really trust you. The question is, when do they do that? If I would ask you, what really gets a team together? Going together through good times or bad times? Easy or hard times? Most people will say, well, going together through hard times actually makes the team stick. And when you ask them why, they often say, well, in times of crisis, you see how people really act. Are they just thinking of themselves, or are they actually making it a team effort? Are the leaders actually protecting the team, or are they just looking at their career, not protecting anyone here? And that's exactly the point. As a leader, you do not know when the next crisis hits. Might be a mini crisis, might be a massive crisis, but you need to be prepared because the emotional trust only grows after these moments of truth, the situation of crisis, happens. When you act well, you will gain a lot of emotional trust, which lasts for a long, long time. However, when you do not do too well, the trust will drop. It will not ever recover to the level it could have been before. If it ever recovers, it's questionable and it takes a long time. And it's your job as a leader to know about cognitive swift trust and emotional trust very well. Your job is to first implement the cognitive Swift trust by being a good implementer or organizer with your team, telling people who's joining the team and how should you work with them, introducing them properly. And the emotional trust is built as soon as crisis appears and you hopefully act as sustainable as possible in your team's favor. But of course, now some people might say, well, sometimes I trusted people and they were not very thankful for that. They crossed the line brutally and they pretty much breached my trust. And yes, this happens. We need to talk about what to do, and there are different levels here. Let's start with an easy one. And when you give someone a task and you pass it over to them, and 2 weeks later you come back from vacation and you see task hasn't been done, and there's no reason why it hasn't been done. It was just left over. It was just still there. There was no reason not to do it, but you see it hasn't been done. Of course, it's a breach of trust. First thing you have to check is, did you delegate the task well? Did you really describe it? Did you give all the details? Does the person have the skills for it, the skill set, the means for it, the permit to do anything they want to do? Is everything in place that they could have achieved the task? That's number one. Number two is check communication. Did you really sit down, have a good handover, tell them what to do, what you expect, what is going to be done after you return? Or did you just send out an email and just by coincidence that email somehow got deleted or got snowed under the other bunch of emails people receive? So did you communicate well? Only if you say delegated well, communicated well, that's the point where you can talk about consequences and what you expect next time, and of course how you felt about or feel about what just happened. That's still the easiest part. Let's go for a more difficult one. Let's say someone is cheating with working hours. So they use the system clocking in and out in a way it shouldn't be used. With mobile apps, that sometimes happens. People clock in and out at hours where they clearly should not clock in and out because they aren't there. So they extend their hours artificially, also called fraud. And of course, you could immediately say, just chuck them out, fire them. And in some countries, that's the case immediately. Yeah, you could do that. However, when you chuck them out, there's still no one who does the work. And there's a massive difference if someone is working for the company for 15 years and does it for the first time, or someone is working for the company for 15 days. So as soon as someone might give you a reason, the reason might not be acceptable legally. It might not be acceptable on a factual level, but it might be understandable to a certain extent on an emotional level for the life situation in which they were. Of course, you have to find a solution. When you see that someone does fraud on you, as for example in the working hours, or they pretend to do something which they do not, it's time to talk, and then you have to check what is the company culture. So first, of course, assumption of innocence applies. The burden of proof is always with you. And then you have to check what's our company culture. If your company culture is we just chuck people out, okay, stick to it. If your company culture is we look in the situation, we try to understand, we try to build bridges as long as we can, then of course it is wise to stick to that, because people will always compare situations. When one person is in the organization for 5 years and only gets a warning after this, the next person in the same situation has the same right to the same solution. So be sure that you create a company culture which is based on sustainability, being able to reference the same decision in the same way for the same people. And as said before, of course, when someone is not in the companies for 5 years or 15 years, but for 15 days and they cheat on working hours for the first time, it's perfectly understandable to chuck them out because trust wasn't even really there and you already breached it. So there's no way to work together in the future. So the worst, of course, is when people show any kind of harassment or they show behavior which is wildly unacceptable. May it be racism, politically unacceptable statements, any kind of sexism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, any of that. And by the way, as soon as someone now screams, I just heard politics, excuse me, Niels, it's freedom of speech. Yes, it is. But freedom of speech does not mean freedom of repercussion. If you, for example, work for an organization that in their values clearly communicate, we support political parties that position themselves against racism, and you openly make a racist statement or support political parties which are nationalist or racist, you can enjoy working for anyone running a company being a nationalist and racist person, but in the organization that clearly position themselves to support politics with non-racist remarks, you have the right to leave. Some people, and just this week again, some people always say freedom of speech, and then they think it's not freedom of speech when they have to face consequences. No, you can say whatever you want within, of course, the means you have set with the law. However, anything you say of course, might have a consequence. And you cannot say, I say anything I like and I face no consequences, because then no one is going to trust you. And by the way, no one trusts any leader who says any statement is somehow acceptable. If somehow you accept people making wildly unacceptable remarks, do not be surprised that you will struggle finding any talent on the market. So be sure that as soon as someone shows any kind of harassment, verbally, psychologically, or even physically, that's the end of discussions. You simply remove these people from the organization. By the way, if you don't, you failed as a leader. Full stop. No exception. You now have to proactively design your culture of trust. First, of course, anything that happens, because often people talk more about the negative case than the positive one, obviously. Positive ones are welcomed and you just accept them. Negative ones are often staying on your mind for a lot longer. So first, if something negative happens, assumption of innocence applies. Second, you often expect that people show a certain attempt to trust you. You often wish that they do. However, the attempt to trust you quickly heavily depends on their experience. So when someone, for example, comes straight from vocational training or uni, you're the first position in the working world they ever saw, they most likely trust you a lot easier. When people have seen 2, 3, 4, 5 different situations in organizations which probably were too sustainable or didn't have great leaders, they will take a lot longer to trust you, and please give them the time to do so. Reciprocity is important. When you trust them, most likely in the midterm or long run, they will trust you. However, it's all happening in the context of existing and prior experiences. And as there is no fast forward for experiences, the longer you are in the working world, you most likely have more negative experiences, and you wait a bit longer who to trust and who not to trust. If something goes wrong, always talk about that. We have 3 different ways, and we talked about that in different podcast episodes before. Pit stop feedback, not documented, very informal, but still in a safe space, protected room. No one's able to listen to it. Very important. Second one is the feedback talk. Feedback talk means you sit down, it's documented, and you talk about a certain matter, how to improve. Of course, it's both-sided. Feedback goes both ways, and also positive and negative. And the third one is the critics talk. Critique means you tell someone something went wrong, and then you talk about how to solve it, or you just draw the line and say, sorry, that was it. Very important here is proactivity counts. If you do not design your culture of trust proactively, very quickly people will design it by themselves, and often they stick to the people closest to them. But you have them, and once you have not designed it proactively, you simply have silos of trust. So the team itself trusts itself, but no one talks to the leader. The leaders trust each other, but they don't talk to the team. They talk about the team, and the team talks about the leaders, but they do not talk with each other. So you need to proactively design your organizational structure of trust, just as you design your organization as a whole. And yes, this can be stressful and it is time consuming. However, in times of crisis, when trust is there, you will have people working on solving this very quickly in a very engaged way and for the most and best sustainable solution. And that's what we're all looking for. What will never work is when you claim the trust, when you say, hey, you have to trust me here, you have to give me the benefit of the doubt. They don't have to. Full stop. You have to earn the trust. And when you do what we just talked about, you will get the trust a lot quicker than you think. And I wish you all the best doing so. And yes, as you now heard, that's complicated. And yes, that's a lot of work. This episode happened because of emails I received. Thank you very much for the people who emailed me about this topic. If you now say, hey, I just have things to talk about. Yes, feel free to drop me an email, nb@nb-networks.com, and we just take it from there. You find the email address in the show notes of this podcast, where I also mention my LinkedIn. The LinkedIn is happy to connect there and discuss there. I'm always looking forward to receiving feedback. And the second aspect, which I always recommend, is go to expert.nb-networks.com. We have live sessions and feel free to participate. They are available in the English and German language, so feel free to take international colleagues with you as well. When you join the list, expert.nb-networks.com, you receive the leadership letter, just one email every week. It's every Wednesday morning. It's 100% content, ad-free guarantee. So in each and every of these emails, you get full access to everything I published. Plus, you also will get access to live sessions. There's always the date, the time, and the URL, the link mentioned to get straight in there. The third step is the most important one, however. apply what you heard in this podcast, because only when you apply what you heard, you will see the positive aspects and the positive changes in your organization that you obviously want to have. I wish you all the best doing so. Let me know if you need any help. Always happy to help you. I'm available 24/7. And at the end of this podcast, there's only one thing left for me to say. Thank you very much for your time.